Mind is the reviewing faculty of brain. It never views, it only reviews what the brain has already viewed and acted upon. My name is Ladi Ojas. Welcome to Skeletal Leap, a living adventure. Skeletal Leap transforms one's life into a personal heaven. Today's episode will tell you how I cracked the code of instant central fixation of the mind. Once I had successfully cracked the code of instant central fixation of the body, I obviously moved on to cracking the code of instant central fixation of the mind. It was as important as other central fixations, if not more, since the mind seemed to affect every single domain of human life negatively or else positively. But the very first thing that I got confronted with was ascertaining what exactly it meant. Central fixation of the eyes and central fixation of the body had very clear, tangible definitions that started them. Central fixation of the eyes had meant seeing the best whatever eyes were looking at, and they did so through making the image of the object being seen exactly at fovea on retina. Central fixation of the body had meant doing the best whatever body did while moving or even without moving in space through centering itself at its core 2 inches below the navel and keeping it vertically in line with the sole of the feet. But how would I define central fixation of the mind in a tangible manner without going abstract about it? First of all, I needed to define what exactly the word mind meant. It was certainly different from brain, which we could very tangibly locate inside the skull. Every single thing that went inside it, though complex, yet could exactly be monitored. But that was not the case with mind. I realized that the human linguistic culture all over the world had introduced this entity as a concept to the intellectual perception of our species en masse. And that too without ever clearly defining what it exactly was. Was it a colloquial term given to awareness, the most basic tenet of life? If yes, as it sounded quite plausible, what were its contents? As I tried to scan them all, it immediately struck to me that I couldn't have scanned the contents of my brain in a likewise manner, including all its processes that made it work. Although the brain was a tangible organ with tangible working processes, it couldn't be the part of awareness. Hence, the brain and the mind ought to be two different entities. While scanning the mind, actually, my mind was scanning itself. I first of all realized that it was aware of its awareness. But I was up to scanning what the contents of its awareness that it was aware of were. The first thing I found there was the awareness of thoughts. There were all kinds of them in its awareness. The thoughts it liked, the thoughts it disliked, the thoughts it feared, the thoughts it desired to turn into actions, the thoughts it revered, the thoughts it repulsed, and the thoughts it just cognized without obviously feeling anything about them. There were so many of them there that I wouldn't be able to count if I decided so. Was my mind thinking them right there and then perceiving them as thoughts? But if it was thinking them right there and then, what was the brain doing sitting idle doing nothing? Also, thinking was supposed to be a process inside the brain and not inside the mind. In any case, the mind would never have initiated thinking what it disliked, feared, or repulsed without any sensual perception of them. Moreover, it couldn't even perceive anything on its own, as the perception was initiated through the sense organs, taking the information direct to the brain, not to the mind. It meant that the thoughts that it disliked, feared, or repulsed were already sitting there inside it, along with the thoughts that it liked, desired to turn into actions, or revered, and also the ones that it just cognized without obviously feeling anything about them. What were they doing sitting over there? They were keeping the mind busy. But why did they need to keep it busy? Why didn't they disappear so that the mind could take some rest? I very well perceived that they were tiring the mind. Suddenly, it occurred to me that they needed to settle their scores, and that was why they weren't letting my mind take a rest. Suddenly, I felt hungry. I walked over to the kitchen and picked up some snacks to munch. Then again, I started scanning my mind. Suddenly, it again occurred to me that there was no thought of being hungry anymore. It was a discovery. Whatever had happened suddenly during the past few seconds wasn't a part of my thought process keeping my mind busy. It just happened and immediately got resolved. Something just occurring to me suddenly was an insight that my brain had handed over to my mind, and it didn't need keeping my mind busy anymore. Similarly, suddenly feeling hungry was an instinct needing to get satiated. And once it was satiated, there was no need for it to keep my mind busy anymore, hence it readily disappeared. It meant that the thoughts which were keeping my mind busy came from unresolved issues. Most of them were evoking my emotions or my moral obligations, whether these emotions or moral obligations were welcome or unwelcome. My insights would never have turned into emotions or morals, as their very process of coming into existence was their own resolution. But if my hunger were not satiated for long, either owing to a lack of food or a moral obligation, it could certainly have turned into an emotion or a moral avoidance, depending on why it hadn't been satiated. My brain, not my mind, my brain suddenly rewarded me with another insight again. It said, emotions are merely welcome or unwelcome thoughts imagining satiation of unfulfilled instincts. Morals are welcome or unwelcome beliefs stopping or limiting instincts from getting fully satiated and thus keeping them unfulfilled as they appear from within. Instincts are not thoughts, they are just the energetic drives demanding action to satiate them. This all must have generated a host of moralistic and emotional fragments and subfragments fighting against one another in order to come out as winners for their petty concerns. And unfortunately, it would have turned awareness into a hub of unresolved issues, making life a painful experience rather than a joyful excursion. Thus, awareness or mind was given the charge to honor instincts alone through reporting their demands to the brain as perceptions from within in order to get them satiated by the action the brain took via its motor neural structure. The mind was meant to review all those actions and pass it on to the instincts in order to feel satiated and thus enjoy its experience of living as an individual in collaboration with other individuals around. But it extended its area of control and overstuffed itself with morals and emotions, thus dividing itself in ever fighting fragments, turning life into an experience of strife rather than joy. Here is what I came out with, what we experience all around us today. Mind is the reviewing faculty of brain. It never views, it only reviews what the brain has already viewed and acted upon. It happens efficiently provided this reviewing faculty hasn't negatively affected the spontaneous perception and action taken by the brain. Why is reviewing required? Reviewing is required to give a subjective meaning to the psychedelic perceptions and automatic actions effected by brain. This subjective meaning imparts life with a sense of individual entity having a free will of its own. It makes an individual life a uniquely comprehensible story and thus makes it interesting to this reviewer that mind is. But there is a serious caveat here. The reviewer, that's the mind, finds it so interesting that it holds this review as being the real perception and the real action. It decides to exercise its free will, which ultimately turns into ego that the mind subjectively starts identifying itself with. Even this wouldn't have been much of a problem had this free will not been contaminated. Most often, it gets contaminated by an element of fear that stems from an overrated core of life preservative instincts. Life is born with the fear of losing its instinctual preservation. It's this fear that's at the root of contaminating this free will, making it work as a proverbial selfish gene. It gets subjectively attached to its own faulty apprehensions of what constitutes a threat to life. This fear is a reaction to something that's not a real danger, and the brain may not even perceive it as a real threat. It's rather a conceived threat that the contaminated free will of the reviewer attaches to its comprehension. The contaminated free will is not as intelligent as the spontaneous brain. Along with the instinct of self-preservation, brain also hands over a complete list of other instincts to the reviewer. This is done so that the mind can review, cognize, and comprehend them all as the basic tenets of life, like hunger, thirst, excretion, curiosity, movement, playfulness, adventure, interaction, grouping, love, sex, reproduction, and parenting. All these different instincts need to be given exclusive emphasis in an overall inclusive manner. None of them less, none of them more. But as we saw, the reviewer gets subjectively attached to its faulty apprehensions of threat to life. It does so at the cost of ignoring and at times even suppressing a few other instincts. The main victims to this fear of the mind are the instincts of sex, adventure, curiosity, and interaction. It considers them as challenging self preservation. Sex is such a strong instinct as can make one even ignore one's safety and security. In fact, sex should fall under the category of death instincts as opposed to the instincts of self preservation. This categorization of mind is in contrast with the categorization conceived by Sigmund Freud as life instincts and death drives or thanatos. In fact, he had earlier started working along the idea of death instincts before he moved on to conceptualize thanatos. And at that time, he had categorized sex as one of the prime death instincts. These were conceived as death instincts since they tended to do away with ego, which overemphasized instincts of self preservation. As per this initial concept, mind as ego apprehends these death instincts as capable of killing its hegemonic existence. Obviously, since they could jeopardize life at times, it would never be ready to welcome or even accept them. And even when it does so, it does in a very lukewarm and half hearted way. I find this earlier concept of Freud as more meaningful than his later concepts in his conceptual journey. Hence, I have developed my concepts along with his earlier line of thought. As a result, human culture and society tag sex as the basic sin, acting from that fearful mind's apprehensions. The same is true of the passion and joy of adventure. Adventure is an instinctual drive to jump into an experience that is unknown. The more the passion, the less one is susceptible to get tamed. We can tame a bullock, but never a bull. Human culture and society that are constructed over the most basic foundations of the fear needed to tame their individuals. If they don't get tamed, they may jump into life threatening adventures out of passion. Adventure and safety are two diametrically opposite things. In fact, passion and joy are the hallmark of our death instincts, sex and adventure being the most magnetic among those. That's how and why passion and joy are conceptually closely associated with sex and adventure. Curiosity is something that questions culture and society's training programs aimed at turning their individuals safe and secure. These training programs do so even at the cost of turning them into cogs of ever-turning wheels. The human education system is the worst victim to it, where students must follow a regimen rather than satiate their curiosity. A regimen ensures what students must know in order to safeguard their future. On the other hand, curiosity flows like water, taking one toward unknown horizons, rewarding them with insights. That is when one turns truly intelligent. Mind prefers knowledge to intelligence. But knowledge without intelligence and insight amounts to nothing more than stupidity and nothing less than insensitivity. Interaction is another victim to the hegemony of self-preservation. The more one interacts with strangers or unknown situations, the more one exposes oneself to the risk of getting harmed. This apprehended risk gets generated out of the fear of the unknown. Hence, human culture and society prefer regimented relationship to spontaneous interaction. Relationship is conditioned with set protocols to follow, turning it mechanical and dull sooner than later. Interaction is unconditional, creating its own unique designs every time one has it afresh, turning it aesthetically much more creative. Relationship is safe, interaction is risky. But by the same token, relationship is limited like swimming in a pond, whereas interaction resembles swimming in an ocean. Hence, human culture and society are structured on the foundation of curbing these instincts either overtly or covertly. All four instincts mentioned before surprisingly fall under the category of death instincts. These are the very instincts that kill ego in the mind. That is why and how they appear to be death instincts to the mind. When these instincts are suppressed, their energy gets suppressed as well. Mind conjures a powerful tool to do so: the superego. This superego comprises morals that ought to be respected. If not, another new structure we call guilt coaxes it. Surprisingly, guilt steals its energy from the energy of fear, which is an emotion, another faculty of mind. What happens when energy is suppressed? In fact, it's not only suppressed but also repressed at times. Repression means pushing the consciousness of its suppression to the unconscious mind so that it just forgets everything about it. But their energetic content still keeps pushing on the doors of the conscious mind. And whenever it finds an opportunity, it knocks at it. It not only knocks, it also enters consciousness stealthily when the guards sitting at the doors are snoozing. That's what our dreams are. Not only this, even during their exile in the unconscious, these repressed instincts don't become fully inactive. They retain their capacity to affect the decisions taken by the unconscious mind against its conscious reasoning. A few different morals are constructed to downgrade the content and energy of repressed instincts. The moral of piety downgrades the powerful instinct of sex. Mind understands how powerful and inevitable sex is. Hence, it creates another sub-moral of marriage under the moral of piety as a spiritual union. It's designed to be a monogamic sexual relationship between one man and one woman all through their life. Humans are not designed to have their sex quota rationed like this. But under the respectable pressure of piety, they accept it at the conscious level. However, their unconscious mind always keeps attracting them to others outside their marriage. It's not only about getting attracted, but also about having sex with them mentally, if not physically, and stealthily. Mind fragments itself in many parts, all fighting with one another all day long. This infighting continually tires us even when we haven't done that much work to justify our tiredness. We never get as tired when we enjoy doing something as we do when we don't enjoy doing it. In fact, we almost don't get tired when enjoying, even while doing the toughest of jobs. Mind constructs quite a few other morals to covertly downgrade the content and energy of curiosity and its questioning attitude. It does so in the name of obedience, faith, reverence, loyalty, or devotion in order to avoid questioning the authorities. What happens to the passion of instincts when its joy gets frustrated? Instincts get distorted by turning into emotions. Consequently, instinctual joy of passion turns into the idea of joy, which we call happiness. Happiness needs to be defined as waiting with some probability to experience joy at some point in the future. When we are actually enjoying something, we don't need to be happy as we are simply enjoying it right then and there. We can enjoy while being sad as well. Like our skin will always enjoy the touch of winter sun even if we are grieving. Ironically, unlike passion, emotions always exist as pairs of opposites like happiness, sadness, bravery, cowardice, courage, timidity, confidence, diffidence, hope, despair, excitement, boredom, attachment, detachment, anger, guilt, pride, shame, anxiety, depression, and fear, greed. One might wonder how fear and greed are opposite emotions. Isn't it the fear of losing that turns us greedy to hoard in case we lose some? Immortality as a greedy concept has always been an antithesis of the fear of losing life. Psychology tends to categorize emotions as positive and negative, always siding with the positive ones. But they are the two sides of the same coin. In fact, the negative ones are more basic, born out of the frustration of passion. Their positive counterparts are just feel-good facades that we wear so as not to get intimidated by them. Let me give another example here. Psychology tells us to be confident instead of being diffident. How does being confident help us? Let's take a hypothetical example. Suppose you and I are to arrive at an interview for the same job, and both of us are equally confident. So our confidence isn't going to help both of us at all, simply because one of us is bound to lose. And even if both of us are diffident, one of us is bound to win. So this advice of being confident is mathematically wrong. We desire to be confident because we are basically diffident. Isn't it a better thing to be neither and just be natural, ready to face what naturally comes to us? That's what the futility of all emotions is. They are not natural. They are the constructs of ideas and not the realities behind them. Satiating real instincts generates passion and joy instead of emotions like happiness. Happiness as an emotion plays with the idea of joy rather than real joy, which only passion can generate. Being happy for the next moment instead of enjoying this very one is like masturbating instead of having real sex. Everyone always feels like they are missing something in life, but no one really knows what. What we all are missing is joy right now, which only passion can generate, not any emotions. Psychology of the mind has made it an unnaturally complex pattern that is much bigger than what it really is. A reviewer. It negatively affects the brain's physiology through its nervous system across the entire body. Let us see how. The mind, in its evolution along human culture and human society, has fragmented itself into many parts. These fragmented parts are always in a state of war with one another. The result is that they keep wasting their energy. As a further result, the organism is thrown into a state that lacks energy. Anatomically, this shows up as a habitually unnatural posture of the skeleton, especially at its joints. The skeleton does this to itself through the mind by drooping its 360 joints down and tucking them in. In the army training throughout the world, they go a step further in a dangerous way. They train soldiers in tucking the skeleton out while it is still drooping down. No one has yet analyzed that it turns them aggressively violent rather than passively sensitive. But it has been turning their purpose of turning their soldiers brave, and they are happy with it. This gets further worsened by the muscles in their vicinity getting rigidified and thus changing their habitual anatomy. Both these structural changes affect nerves and blood vessels attached to them, thereby changing their habitual anatomy as well. And this is what gives birth to those infamous closed chakras, or as I call them, just chakras, all along the length of the spinal cord. If we look at it from a neurological perspective, it stops the vagus nerve from carrying signals effectively. They block the much needed dialogue between the gut and the brain to keep the nervous system functioning properly. That's how the materialistic approach to life looks at it. Let's look at it from the angle of the vitalistic approach to life and the mind body system. Surprisingly, the vitalistic approach also talks of closed chakras along the spinal cord that block the flow of Kundalini. Kundalini is the life energy designed to flow through the nerve named Sushumna along the spinal cord. The brain works optimally when Kundalini flows unblocked through Sushumna between the root chakra in the vicinity of gut and the crown chakra in the vicinity of brain. The similarity in the physiological descriptions of two diametrically opposite philosophical approaches to life has always intrigued me. Maybe the two approaches are ways of looking into the same reality from two different angles. Time will tell. Regardless, the deformed psychology of the mental structure affects the physiology of the human body negatively. It compromises the capacity of the 10th cranial nerve to carry signals, that is Kundalini, in an uninhibited manner. The result is a physiologically compromised nervous system of which the brain is the most central organ. That is how a compromised mind compromises the brain as well. The brain loses its spontaneity to think in the moment as the mind pushes it toward past and future thoughts. What's the way out? Either we change the psychology of mind or the physiology of body to put it back on the right track. If the mind can affect the body negatively, the body can affect the mind as well, and positively at that. Changing the psychology of the mind is an uphill task, mainly because it's vague. It very easily makes us stray along its functional complexities without even giving any feedback. Thus, it keeps us blindly guessing if we are on the right track or not. The probability of being right is way less than being wrong. It's because there are many wrong, but only one right way, and we are trying to hit the bullseye blindfolded. On the other hand, let's look at a miraculous physical activity that changes the psychology of the mind instantaneously. Skydiving, apart from being an awesome sport, is also an awesome physiological meditation. Under conditions of free fall, people tend to stop breathing, although they can breathe, but they don't need to. Whatever little oxygen they require is absorbed by their skin through osmosis in their system. Its only limitation is that it's there only for the duration of 6 to 7 minutes it takes to touch the ground. As this intense experience instantly changes the body's physiology, it also instantly changes the mind's psychology. Here is a first-hand account of a first-time skydiver. I was out. Everything mentally ended. Over. Started. Me. Perhaps more dead than alive. Perhaps more alive than I will ever be. Breathing just as I had been taught. Wind. Wind and breath. Until wind and breath became indiscernible, became as one. And yes, almost weightless. It was true. Weightless and so real. There was the earth, neither coming at me nor me at it. No up, no down, no me in the ego sense of me, just some thoughtless consciousness. And yes, it was awesome simply to be, or not. The sky was in my lungs, and it never once occurred to me would the parachute open. Sounds like the skydiver is describing an out-of-body experience instead of a free fall. We may be moved to think it was actually so if not for the references to wind, earth, and the parachute. Swiss scientists have recently discovered something. They sent a very weak current to the back right part of the brain. It triggered an out-of-body experience for the patient. This out-of-body experience is also associated with the sense of levitation. They found that it could be recreated at will whenever a particular part of the brain was stimulated by an electric current. Scientists also say that a human body has a naturally weak electric field. Its disruption causes disease. Therefore, drugs are being designed to restore this weak field. But the exact nature of this field is not yet fully understood. In the process of changing its psychology, the mind needs to empty itself of all its beliefs, including morals and emotions. It needs to be kept limited to reviewing and comprehending what brain supplies it with, that is, instincts, as an observer alone. In other words, it needs to turn truly agnostic. It's not easy. It scares the mind to death, quite literally. The mind really considers it as its death. That's why it stealthily keeps turning all meditations into new visualizations, new imaginations, and new beliefs instead of the old ones. It sheds old beliefs and embraces new ones like old wine in a new bottle. And it does so just in order not to get caught for trying to keep its death away. That's why and how mental and spiritual meditations at times get reduced to performing pious rituals alone. Emptying the mind means getting rid of all its beliefs, habits, fears, and desires. If we try to do this through conscious mental effort using our willpower, we miserably fail. This is because we are trying to kill the mind by the mind itself. Why would the mind ever commit suicide? It's happy being in control of not only our psychology but also our biology. It does so by turning our perceptions and urges mechanical. It's only possible to empty the mind using itself when it's posed with an impending emergency that it has no solution for. It stops working in such an impending scenario. Consequently, it gets forced to surrender its reign over any action that could get rid of it. In such a situation, the brain takes charge and performs the appropriate action to come out of that scenario. I remember a story from my life when my spirit of adventure posed a similar challenge to my mind, and my mind just resigned. But my spirit still went ahead with my brain alone and faced the challenge with my mind held back as it was absolutely emptied. It was in the year 1992 that I visited a beautiful high altitude valley in the Himalayas named Manali. I had already booked a cottage for a month-long stay over there. We were three in our family: my wife, my 6-year-old daughter, and I. We were enjoying our stay, doing something new each day. After around 10 days, we thought of going on an unconventional trek in the valley, a trek along the untrodden side of the river Beas that flowed through the valley. There was no road on that side of the river. Any roads that existed were on the other side of the river from our trek. Regardless, we started our trek and kept moving along the river upstream. After around half an hour of our trek, the river got us stuck. It was taking a sharp turn there after hitting a high rock on our side of the trek. So there was no way to go further. We were a little disappointed. I looked around the hill to the side of the river. I was looking for a bridle path, hoping to climb up a little and then come down to move further along the river. That way we could have circumvented the sharp turn and climbed down to the river ahead of the sharp turn. As I was investigating the visible bridle paths, I spotted a man standing at the hilltop looking curiously toward us. I shouted, aiming my voice in his direction, "Hey! Hey!" The man shouted back from the hilltop. I explained to him in my sign language what we were up to. Seemingly a local, he immediately understood what we wanted. He threw a fleeting look along the bridle paths up the hill. Then he looked down around the river bend and then waved at us to climb up. As we started climbing up, I spotted him coming down toward us as well. That surprised me a bit, but as we climbed up a little further, I realized why he had made his way down. As we reached a nearly horizontal patch lined up with a nearly vertical rock, we found him standing up there. What a helping spirit combined with curious involvement. He smiled, sitting atop the approximately 7 feet high rock, tilted at around 105 degrees from that nearly horizontal patch. I had seen this rock from above and I knew you would need my help to climb it, he said, smiling. Thanks a lot. I felt grateful. As I looked down once from where we were standing, I found us to be exactly over the river bend, which meant that by then we had climbed a few hundred feet. The man lied down on his stomach on the horizontal patch atop the rock. From there, he hung his arms down along the slope of the rock. First, my wife held his hands, and I pushed her from behind as he pulled her up to the top. As the patch above the top was comparatively narrow, he made her sit a little away on a gentle slope. Then he came back to the rock top and lied down on his stomach, hanging his arms down again. This time I lifted my daughter and pushed her up from behind as he pulled her up easily. He made her sit along with my wife and came back to the rock top again. As he lied down on his stomach a third time, hanging his arms down to pull me up now, he realized it wouldn't work. Oh, he exclaimed, disappointed. By then, I too had realized that we had not accounted for this scenario. With my wife and my daughter, I was there below to push them up, but now I was alone with no one to do the same for me. The man and I looked into each other's eyes and then down at the river below flowing with roaring ferocity. We forgot this, I said. Now? He asked me. It's risky, I said with a sigh. Disappointing, he sighed back, dropping his head on the top of the rock. Hey, is it really impossible? I looked at the height and the slope of the rock. Not exactly, but yes, almost, he opined. Why don't we do it? I can push myself up with all my might. My adventure bug bit me further. He looked at me intently. I don't bother about myself, but you have a family along. If you aren't able to make it the very first time, we both will be down there in the river. We will be flown away by its gushing waters, not to be found even as dead bodies ever. A falling man catches at a straw. You won't even be able to leave my hand pulling me down along. He explained what all it could entail. Oh, then send them back and we will go down the way we came up from. I felt concerned about a stranger's life not to be jeopardized. But I won't feel good, he exclaimed as he looked into my eyes intently again. I kept looking back into his. Okay, let's do it. Just take care to sync your push with my pull exactly at the same moment. He finally gave his verdict. Think twice before you say yes, I said. You too, came his reply. Ready? I asked. Ready? He asked. We both started counting aloud. 1, 2, 3. As we counted 3, I found myself lying along him with my head toward his feet up on the patch at the top of the rock. 2 sighs of relief from the two of us, and we smiled calmly looking at each other's face. I did it. In fact, my body did it. I don't know how I did. It was exactly like what that middle-aged mechanic in my story in episode 11 had done. He too didn't have any clue of how he had done what he had. My wife and daughter didn't even come to know what we both had come up through. My mind was just empty, as it remained empty for a long while after. But the habits die hard. The entire pattern comes back to the same square one once the emergency gets over. Hence, though imminent emergencies can empty our mind in a flash of a second, they aren't a permanent modus operandi. But yes, they can give us an instant glimpse of what an empty mind feels and works like. They can certainly demonstrate the superiority of any action done on our part without any doubt about it. That was what had happened in the just mentioned story as well as in the mechanic's story mentioned in episode 11. But then how can the mind be permanently emptied? Remember the first-hand account of a first-timer in skydiving quoted just before? I repeat it here for your convenience. I was out. Everything mentally ended. Over. started. Me. Perhaps more dead than alive. Perhaps more alive than I will ever be. Breathing just as I had been taught. Wind, wind and breath. Until wind and breath became indiscernible, became as one. And yes, almost weightless. It was true. Weightless and so surreal. There was the earth neither coming at me nor me at it. No up, no down, no me in the ego sense of me, just some thoughtless consciousness. And yes, it was awesome simply to be, or not. The sky was in my lungs, and it never once occurred to me would the parachute open. It's a perfect example of a mind having gone emptied. And what a tremendous experience this was. But unfortunately, this too stays for a maximum duration of 6 to 7 minutes. That's while the skydiver is falling free before the parachute opens. We could extend this time with the help of a virtual reality simulator without even having a real skydiving session. But how long for? We could even consider improving the quality of virtual freefall simulator as compared to a real skydiving session. That could even entail removing the decelerating effect of air with a better control on experiencing acceleration due to gravity. We could hypothesize that such a perfect simulation for a certain minimum time might empty the mind permanently as well. In fact, I am already working on a project that proposes to testify this hypothesis under strict laboratory conditions. But we cannot wait for this hypothesis to get proved correct. We do have a surer method, though a little slower than the proposed hypothesis, at least for the time being. One in hand is always better than two in the bush. The code of instant central fixation of the mind is same as the code of instant Kundalini awakening and establishing gut-brain communication. And that's what I have already mentioned in episode 11. The code that sends surges of energy up the spine from the gut to the brain empties the mind as well. We can easily keep emptying our mind continuously with every single extended exhalation when all our chakras are open. From a vitalistic angle, it amounts to sending periodical surges of Kundalini from an open root chakra to an open crown chakra. From a materialistic angle, it amounts to sending periodical surges of neural communication from the gut to the brain. Whatever it might be, but it does fill the crown of the head with inexplicable joy with every single extended exhalation. Along with joy, it also embellishes the brain with newer energy and newer insights. And every surge of this inexplicable joy keeps the mind emptied for its duration. In fact, a little longer. Before it starts waning, the next surge appears with the next extended exhalation, reinforcing the mind's emptiness again. In case we ever miss the sequence, the hell isn't going to fall loose on earth. We can again pick the thread of breath from wherever it right now is and restart the sequence once again. Download the code of instant central fixation of the mind in the resources section of Skeletal Leap Book 1, available on skeletalleap.com/the mind-body connection. Thanks for listening to this episode of Skeletal Leap, a living adventure. In the next episode, I will tell you how I cracked the code of instant brain activation and coming to here and now. Be a part of Skeletal Leap community. Subscribe to Skeletal Leap newsletter. Click on the link in the description to subscribe.